True Tales of the Wild West presents The Butlers of Karnes County by Charles L. Olmsted. Yearning for a new life in the early days of the United States was a gamble. Manifest destiny called to go west, but more than one family died from disease, the elements, or violence. Colonel Butler led his family away from the security of their home in Mississippi to build a better and more prosperous life out west. GTT was the slogan in the 1840s and 1850s for many families. Gone to Texas. A deaf-mute, Colonel sold his farmland as he and his wife Sarah loaded up their family of 13 children and struck out for Texas in the fall of 1852. Their oldest child, Susan, was 24 years old, divorced, and with a 6-year-old daughter by the time of the big move. The oldest son, Woodward, had left Mississippi in 1849, working his way through Louisiana before finding the spot in South Texas that would be the family's new home. Woodward was waiting for his family in what was then Goliad County when they arrived on Christmas Eve, 1852. 5 families had joined the 3-month expedition. They crossed treacherous swamps and prairie that were filled with deadly snakes and alligators, plus Indians and desperados. That section of Goliad County soon became known as Karnes County. Generations of Butlers have come and gone in the last 170 years, and they have spread throughout South Texas, but Karnes County is still home to many. The going was rough at times with shootings, disease, and hard luck, but they have never wavered in their ethics of hard work and drive for success. Tragically, Woodward was the first casualty after the family was reunited following 3 years apart. He had traveled to the Texas coast for supplies, but caught yellow fever and died before returning home in November 1853. The Butler children, now starting their own families, tried to establish themselves as farmers as the country inched closer to civil war. The Civil War called 4 Butlers to serve in the Confederate Army, and fortunately, there were no deaths. William, second oldest son for Bernal and Sarah, was captured shortly after driving cattle to starving troops at Post Arkansas. The smell from the cooked beef must have aroused the Northern soldiers' taste buds, and they attacked the post, capturing hundreds of Confederates. W.G. and 2 others escaped after jumping into the frigid river in January 1863 and made their way back to the fort in Uvalde, Texas. The short cattle drive sparked an idea in W.G., and he went to work on his plan once the war ended in 1865. Before the year was out, he conducted another cattle drive, but this time he made money from the Union Army and hatched plans for bigger paydays. W.G. Butler spent the next 2+ years after the war preparing to jump into the cattle business. Rail transportation was still 2 decades away in South Texas. Starting in March 1868, Butler led men up the Chisholm Trail 2 and 3 times a year for 20 years. The cattle drivers took up to 3 months driving hundreds of cattle to Kansas or Nebraska. Once on the rail car, it took just a few days to reach the East Coast, where that $4 cow from the range would be $40 at the stockyard. Then in a Virginia butcher shop, or a steakhouse in New York. When plans were made for the railroad to come to South Texas, Butler donated land and money for the cause. A rail line went close enough to his house, he sat on the front porch watching cattle being loaded for market. The Wild West took its toll on people, and the Butlers were not spared. Sometimes there was bad blood in the family. Bernal Butler supposedly had his son Robert committed to the Austin Insane Asylum. The story goes that Robert escaped and returned home to confront his father. Bernal was found dead on April 23, 1870, supposedly from falling down a cliff. Eldest daughter Susan went looking for her father and was stricken with a broken heart when she discovered him dead. Whether Bernal fell or had help has fueled family stories. The same goes for Susan's plight. The story continues that Robert returned to Austin and died in the asylum a month later, where he is buried on the grounds. Friends sometimes became enemies rather quickly. Such was the case with Washington Butler, pictured on the right. He and John Cooper had been friends for years, but that changed, and the two suddenly found themselves at a general store in Helena when gunfire erupted. "Is Cooper dead?" Washington asked as he lay mortally wounded. "Yes," someone answered. "Well, then I die happy," he said, taking his last breath. Emmett Butler was warned to stay out of Helena, but went anyway to celebrate Christmas. Sheriff Leary tried to bring him in for questioning, but Emmett shot him. Emmett tried to ride out of town, but the sheriff's last words urged revenge. The townspeople opened fire, leaving Emmett mortally wounded in December 1884. When W.G. Butler went to retrieve his dead son, he supposedly told the town that he was going to kill the town that had killed his son. The Dalyville shootout made national news in September 1886. It was deadlier than the shootout at the OK Corral. Dalyville has been largely forgotten, though, including where it once existed. The Dalyville election fracas pitted the Butler family, who wanted to keep alcohol out of the town, against Sheriff Fate Elder and his men who wanted alcohol. The Butlers had lost relatives and friends to the drink throughout the years. Adeline, W.G.'s wife, was left to raise their 8 children and care for the land and house on her own most of the year. The house, bursting at the seams at times, saw the children born and raised there with little in the way of comfort for Adeline. She finally got her wish when W.G. gave her the house of her dreams in 1895. Built for $5,000 at the time, it would cost an easy $1 million in today's money. Theodore, or T.G. Butler, was beaten and shot in 1895 by a group of young men. The son of W.G. and Adeline, he lingered between life and death for 6 weeks. He eventually resumed his law enforcement duties and lived a long life before dying at the age of 76 in 1948. Another Butler son, Newton, was married to Mary Elder, whose brothers Fate and Bud had been killed at the Dalyville shootout. Newton was killed in a New Orleans hospital in March 1895 after surgery. Earlier that year, a triple murder occurred on his property. There was speculation that Newton was the target then. He knew he was living on borrowed time as he made his goodbyes before departing on the train for Louisiana. There were accidents that were just as tragic. Layla, the 15-year-old daughter of Fate Butler, was playing with other children when a firearm accidentally discharged and lodged in the girl's head. A doctor was summoned who made her comfortable as family and friends came by to say the final goodbyes. She died 2 days later. The 3 daughters of W.G. and Adeline, Cora, Louisa and Helen, stayed in Karnes County. Cora and Louisa were busy farming, while Helen ranched. Cora inherited her father's mansion and lived there as a single woman. These and more stories on the Butler journey are detailed in the book The Good, the Bad, the Butlers, Story of a Texas Pioneer Family by Charles L. Olmsted. The book is available in paperback and ebook through different websites.